The morning air felt unusually sharp against Barron Trump's skin, not because it was cold, though it was, but because something in the way the wind touched him felt pointed, as if it were prodding a bruise no one else could see. He had been jogging for nearly 20 minutes, yet his mind hadn't followed the rhythm of his steps. Usually the repetition helped left, right, left a mechanical beat that lulled his thoughts into a temporary peace. But today there was a static in his head that no amount of movement could drown out. Harvard says no. 3 words: clean, final. Delivered via email with all the warmth of a machine. For the first time in his life, a door had closed and no one, not his last name, not the expectations of the nation, not even his father, could pry it back open. He kept running, as if he could outrun the reality pressing into his chest. Am I just a consequence of my father's decisions? Will everything I do be predetermined by a name I didn't choose? The questions weren't new, but today they carried weight, like wet clothes clinging to his frame, refusing to dry. He had tried to be his own person, quieter, more thoughtful, less showy, but when the rejection letter came, it was clear that the world didn't see him. They saw Trump, and maybe that was the problem all along. Barron's pace slowed as he reached the end of a street he didn't recognize. It was quieter here, no cars, no horns, just birds and the occasional rustle of wind through the naked branches. His eyes caught the outline of something unfamiliar in the distance. It was a small, old church stone walls, weathered by time, a crooked wooden cross leaning slightly on its spire. There was no sign, no name, just silence radiating from within. He stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't like him to go into places like this, but maybe that was the point. Maybe today had already pulled him far enough out of character that stepping into an old empty church wouldn't feel like crossing a line, but finding one. He walked up the uneven stone steps and gently pushed open the wooden door. It creaked, of course. Of course it creaked. Inside, the air was different, thicker somehow, not with dust or incense, but with stillness, as if silence itself had taken root in the walls and grown there for decades. The pews were worn and dark, and at the far end stood a single lit candle near the altar. Apart from that, the room was nearly empty, except for one man, sitting near the front in a long, dark coat, his head bowed in still prayer or contemplation. Barron quietly slid into a back pew. He didn't kneel. He didn't cross himself. He didn't know how, and even if he did, it didn't feel honest. Instead, he sat. Let his breathing slow. Let his thoughts circle the quiet space. You don't belong anywhere, do you? He thought. You don't even know if you believe in God, and yet here you are, hoping he believes in you. For a few minutes, nothing happened, and then a voice rose from the silence, not loud, not sudden, but calm, the kind of calm that wraps around your shoulders like a blanket rather than startles you. "Good morning, son. Are you all right?" asked the man gently, turning toward Barron with eyes that seemed to see something more than the room itself. Barron hesitated. There was something about the tone, not pity, not curiosity, but knowing. As if this man, this stranger, had already heard stories like his before. "I don't know," Barron admitted, his voice lower than usual, as if the stillness had required it. "I think I've never felt more alone." He paused, then added, "It feels like there's always a pressure around me. Expectations, judgments, and lately, it's getting harder to breathe under it." The man nodded slowly, then offered a gentle smile. He stepped closer and sat in the pew just one row ahead of Barron, turning slightly toward him. "People don't always understand the weight that comes with being seen before you ever speak," he explained. "And yet silence, real silence, can be the only place where that weight begins to lift." Barron looked down at his hands. "I don't even know why I came in here," he confessed. "I was just running. I was angry. And then I saw this place, and it felt different." "You were drawn to quiet because the noise was starting to crush you," the man replied. "Sometimes that's how God calls people, not with answers, but with silence that echoes back the truth you've been afraid to hear." Barron looked up. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in defiance but in thought. "And what if I'm not sure I believe in God?" he asked, not mockingly, but with sincere doubt. The man's smile didn't fade. "Then talk to him anyway," he answered. Because sometimes the most honest prayers come from those who aren't sure anyone is listening. The air inside the church hadn't changed, but something in Barron had. His breathing had steadied, his shoulders had dropped, but his heart still beat with the uncertainty of someone trying to believe in something, anything, before giving up completely. The man still sitting in the pew ahead turned more fully toward him now. His eyes didn't judge. They simply waited, patient, warm, like sunlight through stained glass. "I don't even know your name," Barron said, a little awkwardly, suddenly aware of how strange it was to be saying these things to a stranger. "Father Johnsen," the man answered gently. "But today, I'm just someone who's listening." Barron nodded slowly. "I guess I needed that more than I thought," he admitted. "Lately, it's been like, everyone has an opinion about what I should be, who I should become, but no one's actually asked me what I want." Father Johnsen tilted his head, watching him closely. "So let me be the first," he said. "What do you want, Barron?" Barron looked away, unsure if he had the courage to answer that question honestly. "I wanted Harvard," he finally said. "Not because it's prestigious or whatever. I wanted it because I thought that if I got in, people might finally see me. Not the last name, not the politics, just me, a person, someone capable, worthy." He exhaled sharply, then added, "But even that got swallowed by everything surrounding my father." The priest remained silent, letting Barron's words fill the space. "I used to think maybe I could carve out a life that was separate from his," Barron continued. "But the older I get, the more I feel like I'm just walking in the shadow of decisions I didn't make, carrying the weight of a world I didn't build." He stopped, his throat tightened. There was more he wanted to say, maybe even scream, but something about this place forced him to speak slower, to let the emotions rise instead of erupt. "I read the letter 4 times," he said. "Each time I thought maybe I missed a detail, a loophole, a hidden word that meant something else. But no, it was clear, rejected. And though they didn't say it, I knew why." "You believe it's because of who your father is," Father Johnsen said quietly. "I don't just believe it," Barron replied. "I know it. They didn't even give me an interview. Just a clean cut, as if I came tainted and nothing I ever did would be enough to wash it off." A long silence followed. Father Johnsen folded his hands, then looked up toward the candle still burning near the altar. "You know," he said, "when Jesus stood before the crowd, they didn't see a healer or a teacher. They saw a threat. They projected their fears and anger onto him because they couldn't understand how someone so quiet could carry so much light." Barron frowned slightly. "I'm not Jesus," he said. Father Johnsen smiled, then responded, "Of course you're not. But rejection is as old as humanity, and sometimes it says more about those doing the rejecting than the one being rejected." Barron looked at the wooden floor beneath his feet. His thoughts spun. "I'm just tired," he finally whispered. "Tired of pretending I'm not affected. Tired of acting like I'm fine. Because I'm not. I've never felt this exposed, this unprotected." Father Johnsen nodded slowly. "There's a strange kind of freedom in that," he said. "When everything falls apart, you're left with only what's real. And that, my son, is where faith often begins." Barron tilted his head. "Faith?" he asked. "Not in a religion," Father Johnsen clarified. "In something bigger than your pain. In the idea that life isn't finished with you. That even rejection can be a divine redirection." Barron sat with that thought. "I don't know if I'm ready to believe in any of that," he said honestly. "But I want to believe there's more than just this weight I'm carrying." "Wanting to believe is already a beginning," Father Johnsen replied. Barron remained seated long after Father Johnsen's words had faded into silence, as though the words themselves had settled into the wooden pew and were now rooting him in place. Outside, the morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows, casting fractured patterns of red and gold across the stone floor. Each shifting beam of light seemed to pulse with possibility, and for the first time that day, Barron felt something like quiet determination stirring in his chest. He glanced at the priest, who was extinguishing the single candle by the altar with deliberate care. The flame flickered once, then sank into darkness. Father Johnsen looked over his shoulder and offered a small, understanding nod. "Whenever you're ready," he said gently, and then stood, smoothing the folds of his coat before turning back toward the door. Barron rose as well, his legs carrying him forward as though guided by an unseen hand. He passed the pew where the priest had knelt and moved toward the exit with a resolve that surprised him. He realized that leaving this place would not mean abandoning the hope he'd found, but rather carrying it with him into the world outside. As Barron reached for the heavy wooden door, he paused and looked back. The church was empty now, silent except for the echo of his own breath. A thought occurred to him, soft but insistent. What if this rejection was not an end, but a beginning? He pressed his hand against the doorframe, feeling the rough grain beneath his fingertips. Father Johnsen stepped out first, then turned to face him. He smiled, and in that smile, Barron saw the patience he had been offered, an invitation to be both lost and found at the same time. "I'll come back," Barron said quietly, and then added, "Thank you." "You're always welcome," Father Johnsen replied, his voice steady and kind. "And remember, faith isn't a destination. It's a journey you take one honest step at a time." Barron nodded, and with that he stepped through the threshold. The air outside felt different now, brighter somehow. The wind that had been his adversary during the run now caressed his skin with gentle warmth. He inhaled deeply, allowing the newness of the morning to fill his lungs. He began to jog again, but this time his steps weren't an escape. They were an affirmation of movement, of progress. Each footfall pressed into the pavement with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in weeks. The world he returned to, cars speeding by, people hurrying to work. The distant hum of life felt less threatening and more like a canvas waiting for his imprint. As he ran, Barron spoke aloud, his voice low but determined. "I am more than a name," he said firmly to the empty streets, "and I will define my own path." He let the words settle in the still morning, trusting that they were heard even if only by the wind. Let's keep the conversation going. Subscribe, share, and drop your thoughts below. Your perspective is valuable and might inspire others.